My guest today is a philosopher who used to carry the God delusion in her purse like lip balm and went on to write a 300-page Oxford dissertation on salvation through science before concluding the answer wasn't Richard Dawkins or meta-analyses, it was God. A former angry atheist turned Christian philosopher who proudly insists you're wrong about almost everything, and that's the best news there is. She's coined the term intellectual vulnerability, which sounds like a TED topic, but is more like a friendly roast for your ego. And before all that, she wrote a paleo health book called Sexy by Nature. So she's the first guest I've had on qualified to tell me why both my abs and my ideas suck. Dr. Stefani Ruper, welcome to the show.
What an intro. I hope this podcast gets super famous just off the quality of the intros alone. I do want to offer one small corrective, but it feeds into this topic of intellectual vulnerability, which is that I didn't pause at Christian philosopher. I kept going to, I think I probably identified as a Christian philosopher about 6 months. And something that I was doing was testing the hypothesis of faith. And can I become a Christian? Because I think Christianity is really cool. And I did a ton of praying and going to church. And I ended up never making it to, I definitely believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. But I did make it to, I am more open to the possibility of things beyond me. I did make it to a kind of faith. I do go to church every Sunday. I volunteer at the chapel at my local VA. So there are things about me that are Christianish, but there's got to be an asterisk on it. And it's all in process. I went on a shamanic journey a couple of weeks ago. That was awesome. So anyway, thank you for the cool intro. Here I am on the way.
Tell me about your Ursa Minor tattoo and its sort of superpositional meaning to you.
The superpositional meaning. What a fantastic question. I'm so curious about how you're finding all this information about me. And when people Google me, as you saw, you can find articles about how to believe in Jesus from an atheist perspective. You can find videos of me dancing on bar tops in Taiwan. I mean, like you get in Paris. I'm a bit of a thing. A diversely experiencing thing. Anyway, my tattoo. It's right here. It's on my collarbone. It is the Little Dipper, and the end of it has a North Star on it. I got this tattoo in my early 20s. I had been in love with science my entire life. That came from having been raised in a home without religion and by a man who really loved rationality and work ethic and intellectual discipline. And that sort of led me to become enamored with science as the only way to make meaning. And I also really began to wear this identity of a free-thinking rationalist, something that lives in our culture today, but surprise, hasn't always throughout all cultures and time. It's an idea, it's an identity that has developed through all of these different cultural forces over the course of the last 200 years, which I have spent many years studying. Anyway, so I had this identity and I became obsessed with science. And then I went to Dartmouth and I was planning on being in the sciences and becoming like Richard Dawkins and using science to say something meaningful. And this was really the only way that I saw to say something meaningful about life and what we're doing here. I was actually studying life on other planets. And my thesis was on the viability of microbial life in the interior of terrestrial planets back at Dartmouth many years ago. And then at the end of my degree, and I was planning on going on to do a doctorate in astrobiology, I was titrating an iron solution in the lab and I stood up and I was like, whoa.
As we all do.
I'll do. I've been dismissing the most cherished beliefs of 99% of people who have ever existed as stupid and weak without ever asking them what they think. And I had been priding myself on open-mindedness all along, and the hypocrisy of that just stunned me. So then I printed a bunch of pages from the Zygon Journal of Religion and Science. I went to live in the Italian Alps. I was an au pair. And I started reading the journal, and I, right from the start, thought, holy shit, the theologians have a point. So I went to seminary. I got the tattoo in that season of breaking the cage of my existential despair open with a hammer. Because I had been an atheist all along, but I hated it. I felt like it had to be true because of my identity and all of the things, the ideas I'd been exposed to. It had to be true, but I hated it. And then for the first time ever, I began peering at the universe and saying, well, maybe. And I got this tattoo as a way of sort of trying to harmonize to take the whole of the universe into my body and live and explore harmony with it. There's a lot of other superimposed meanings, but that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I ask because we have very similar trajectories here. I have this on my arm here. It's Latin. It says omnis pulveri stellarum sumus, which is we are all stardust. So I, like you, got the same tattoo in my early 20s. It was my version of the Dawkins fish, and sort of like quiet rebellion to my silly pseudo-religious upbringing. And then, as anybody does, the meaning sort of evolves over the years. And it's just, every time I think about it now, it's like the sort of minuteness of life. And it's like, if you zoom out far enough, you can't see Earth and Sagan's pale blue dot and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, well, there could be something else out there. I'm open to the idea, and like it's one of those things that is not a large part of my life, but it has helped me be a lot more open to this whole idea that you get into of like, I certainly don't have all the answers, so I need to remind myself that I'm just this very small thing and who knows what. So
I have so many questions. I think on the topic of humility and my not knowing, I think for basically my entire life, I carried this great panic about not knowing. And we understand in today's world that like everybody has a different idea about the universe, all this different kind of stuff. Humans never had to deal with that before. Before, you just kind of like shared the beliefs of the people around you. If you met people with different beliefs, you were like, wow, you're flipping dumb, cool. Or you worship false gods, cool, but mine are still correct. And that was easy. And now we're like, well, everybody's beliefs are valid, but and so how do you hold that? And what I've ultimately arrived at is not panic in the face of my unknowing, but celebration. Because look, if there's something out there that transcends our categories of space and time and like is the creative force behind all of existence, it has to be beyond what any of us can imagine. And maybe some of us are on the way. Maybe some of us are closer than others. I think the ones with worldviews that are more loving than others and involve less violence than others are probably more, or probably closer. But it must just be so beyond. And how can I possibly finally conclusively say there's nothing beyond what we can see and touch when, like when our knowing is so tiny?
I can tell in your voice there's a little bit of an emotional aspect to getting from this panic to where we are now. What's that journey been like?
Oh yeah. I mean, like a little bit of emotion. it's it's the driving force in my whole life. Everybody, we've all got stuff. We've all got stuff. And my stuff since childhood has been terror at being alone. I think humans, like, we long to be safe. We long for homecoming. Sometimes I think of our salvation as coming home, which is safe and I belong. And, as social beings, belonging is just, it's central. I think it's our most important need. We talk about food and water. Everybody in primary school, they're like, oh, food, water, shelter. But prior to that is belonging. And there's robust science behind this. The whole theory of attachment theory states that infants need care more than they need food because you can't get food if you don't have care first. And adults were the same. It's just more complicated. If I don't have pals to help me hunt the woolly mammoths, I'm not going to be able to get the woolly mammoths and the water and the irrigation and all that stuff. Like, we need one another to survive. We need to belong. And that is social, interhumanely social, but I think it's also tied to the universe. And I was raised with no conception of anything beyond us. A lot of people become atheist having been something else before. But people in those situations neurochemically wire to believe that they're not alone in the universe. And I neurochemically wired to believe that I was alone. I was deeply alone. And that's throughout our culture, this hyper individualistic lone wolf mentality. My friends sometimes make fun of me. They're like, I'm Steph, I'm a lone wolf. And that was just deeply inculcated in me by how our social and metaphysical stuff is in the soup of today. So, I mean, gosh, the emotions in that are so huge. The terror of being alone and desperate to not be has just been central in my life. Although I'm not unique to that. I'm just very aware of that.
What have you sort of learned through a decade of religious study that people who sort of do this spiritual soul searching on their own might not have arrived at or haven't figured out yet?
Ooh, nice question. I have no idea what other people's spiritual journeys are like, right? I have always been hyper intellectual. And I don't use that word to imply that there's anything uniquely intelligent about me. I'm just obsessed with ideas. And my spiritual journey was about being extremely rigorous with myself about what I think of things, the nature of the human psychology, right? I just remembered walking into so many professors' offices and being like, hey, why do we believe what we believe? And they're like, oh, no. No, everybody has a theory. Everybody has a theory. And I finally arrived at a theory, and I think that it's the drive for safety. And I've written a whole book about it. Two, actually. But there was that component in understanding our history. I think something, when you come into a spiritual quest, you might lean into a tradition, or traditions you're unfamiliar with, or stuff that is tangential to traditions, spiritualistic stuff. And that's wonderful. And it's exploring a path, but something that's been deeply unlocking for me is deconstructing what I have been. And so in my studies, I learned so much about the history that I was able to step back from the atheism that I was carrying, have always carried, the conviction that there's nothing beyond what we can see and touch, convictions about anything, really. And I just have seen the history of all of this stuff. And I've been working in the health space. Like, I look at how all that is unfolded too, and understanding how everything I believe has been to some degree or another socially constructed. When I take that apart, it sort of frees me up more to look at my options and explore them. I see deconstruction as useful because it then enables us to construct with a clearer foundation.
Yeah, there's a metaphor from a gentleman named Malcolm Collins that I like to use in this scenario, where he talks about sort of the like ideological tree and the sort of core beliefs that we have are the trunk of the tree, and then everything else sort of roots and branches and leaves sort of fold out from the trunk of that tree. And most often we just sort of take any evidence that makes us believe that the trunk of the tree is incorrect as just patently wrong, or there's nothing that's going to update our beliefs, because in order to then reorient ourselves in the world, we have to essentially build an entire new tree from the trunk out. And you're, I think I can pretty easily say, one of the few people that I've seen do this all the way from the trunk. So what's the sort of ongoing process of rebuilding that tree look like for you?
I love that metaphor. I haven't heard it before, so thank you so much. It's very helpful for me. I think of it in terms of like webs, but I like the trunk. And um, I try. I try to change the trunk, but I can't. And it's just the wildest thing, because when I was trying to be a Christian, friends of mine who were Christian would say, well, we all carry doubt. We all have a mustard seed of faith. And so long as you have the mustard seed of faith. But I could never, I have yet to be able to punch through my conviction that there's nothing beyond what we can see and touch. And I have hundreds of thousands of words written. I wrote a 300,000 word book titled Life is Meaningful, a Proof. And I never published it because I don't really believe it. But I'm working on it. And it has, I would say that the trunk it's really softened and has become a little bit more moldable. And maybe what happens in analyzing that trunk is that it enables me to grow branches that I wouldn't have otherwise. Right. And so the trunk is still there, but I'm able to modify it slightly or change the tree slightly. And yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question? I feel like I answered around it.
No, it totally makes sense in that the core belief that you have is this intellectual rigor, and that is congruent with sort of maintaining this holistic tree trunk and spreading the new core, like semi-core branches, or a new set of roots to sort of reach out and find new water or nutrients in an area that you hadn't previously been searching. So I think the metaphor is still quite apt.
Yeah, thank you. There are core values that I think are probably not going to change much, and those are things like openness and orientation towards growth. I also understand, however, that like my obsession with growth is also deeply rooted in my survival strategies as a child, and all it's all I won't found any of it as the perfect or right thing. All I can say is it's my thing, and I'm contributing my thing, and maybe my thing can help other people with their things, and we'll end up being a part of the truth of things. But all I can say is I'm trying for my thing to be in alignment with the truth of things.
So switching slightly to this topic of intellectual vulnerability that dovetails with everything that we've been talking about so far, it seems to me that the sort of potential end game for some of this idea that you've coined is a sort of nihilism or existentialism of this, like, I don't know, nothing matters. What's sort of the antidote to that, as people sort of attempt to explore this idea of intellectual vulnerability?
Thank you. I love this question because I do offer a whole metaphysical justification for this worldview. I offer a view of truth and existence. And in this view, I think it's quite important, actually. In this view, reality isn't unknowable. Reality is is knowable. We do glimpse it. I ground this thinking in evolutionary theory. A lot of people look at evolution and they say, well, we just evolved to survive. We didn't evolve to know truth, so we can't know the truth. But to me, the evidence, the fact that we have survived is evidence that we know more truth than we don't. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to survive. It's human, it's flawed, it's perspectival is the word I like to use. I don't like to use biased because bias to me implies that you're fallen from a perfect standard. I don't think that exists. I think all truth happens in perspectives. But, like I wouldn't tell a bat that its perception of cave ceiling is false. It's very batty. Ours is very humany. Okay. It's perspectival in that sense. It has to be. For existence to be able to perceive itself, it has to look at itself, experience itself from a perspective. And so we've all got little slices of it. And we're glimpsing reality. It's just as through grimy binoculars. And to me, then, that gives us a basis for rich meaning because we can always come to know reality better. And coming to know reality better doesn't just mean the stuff of reality, the physical stuff, but what is justice? What is goodness? Those things exist because we exist. And maybe they exist in a metaphysical domain of meaning that goes way beyond us. Maybe, right? But I think that is all stuff to be explored. And the way to explore them is to have hypotheses and to talk about them with one another. And on top of that, I think that really unlocks potentials for honoring and loving one another because then we become sources of insight and wisdom and respect and love for one another, creating more homecoming in the world, making this more of a shared quest rather than something we need to fight with one another about. So those are some aspects of how it all hangs together meaningfully for me.
It seems like, a lot of this seems to sort of fly in the face of this like atomization and this like drive for safety. And I say that in like the context of the idea of trying to turn the ship around and go back the other direction in the headwinds of society. This idea is going to hit a lot of people as a sort of slap in the face. And if we were to try to like more gently lead them into the path, what are kind of the like baby steps into this idea of intellectual vulnerability? Because I think a lot of people look at it and go, well, no, of course I'm right. They're wrong. This is how it's always been. Like, this is the answer, and like they can just get lost.
Yeah, well, I think the answer depends if I'm speaking directly to these people or if I'm advising somebody how to interact with their friends. I think what's been effective for me is starting to approach, and I mean this just so honestly, approaching other people with softness and my own humility and with respect for them helps them feel safe. And when they feel safe, they can question their beliefs. This has been effective. I'm not just saying this. I have changed people's life. Somebody I knew for decades who always insisted that he was right about everything 18 months ago said to me, "You might be right. I'm going to have to think about that." And I said, what's changed? Why? I laughed so hard I fell out of my chair when he said that to me. It was my father. He said to me, and it was such a convivial conversation. And at the end, he said, "You know what? That's a really good point. I'm going to have to think about that." And I wrote it down. I took out my phone and I wrote it in my notes app, laying on the floor, just laughing. I was like, "What the hell, Dad? Like, what's happened? You know that this is the first time you've ever said that to me, right?" He said, "I'm getting in touch with my sensitive side. I'm a No, with my gentler side, I'm a more sensitive guy than I used to be. A 70-year-old man, and that was him doing that exploration on his own. But that was also me for 15 years. I came home from college picking fights with him left and right. I was like, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. Why are you so stubborn? And then I realized that I wasn't seeking truth alongside him. I was trying to win against him. And that that puts people on the defensive. We live in this world where intellect is a war, right? We're fighting for our beliefs because we think if our beliefs are proved right, we're going to feel more safe. But I think what actually enables us to be more safe is approaching one another in a spirit of, your ideas are welcome here. You are welcome here. Let's talk about it. And then it just opens up. It softens and it opens up. So that's kind of how I advise approaching people and setting grounds for intellectual exploration. And to the point that I like to start with, I don't know, and I lead with my own humility. Like I say, I have no idea. I have no idea. My strongest opinion is that you shouldn't have strong opinions. I shouldn't have strong opinions. I have no idea. And I think I lead by that example, and people see that I'm okay being uncertain, so maybe they can be okay. The one thing I like to say to sort of dislodge people from their certitude that they're right about everything is something I realized. I remember when I realized it, and I was a teenager. I think I was on my way to high school graduation, in fact, to give my address, high school graduation. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there were 7, now 8 billion people on this planet, and they all think they're right about everything. We all do. What are the chances that I'm the one who has it figured out better than everybody else? Is it 0.000000125%? Yes. Yes, it is. And the only way we learn anything is from talking to other people. And so truth has become for me not defending what I know, but wondering, what am I missing?
What's the difference between intellectual humility and intellectual vulnerability?
I love this question. It's a nice tee up for me because I use it a lot. I have seen a lot of academics and others, just people always like, oh, it's so important to be intellectually humble. I'm like, okay, what are you doing about it? To me, intellectual humility is saying, well, I may be wrong. I understand. I may be wrong. Okay. Intellectual vulnerability is saying, okay, I know that I'm at the very least missing something. Can you please help me with that? It is a proactive invitation into my vulnerable intellect to help me. It's the choice to lay down my armor and welcome somebody into that space and actively seek to revise my beliefs. That's it for me.
I feel like the less wrong tagline has sort of been co-opted by the rationalist community. How does the idea of sort of intellectual vulnerability differ from a sort of traditional rationalist mindset?
Quick question. Do you have a PhD in analytic philosophy?
I do not.
I'm
No.
actually I'm curious. Like I don't what is this? What is this?
I'm just
Which
far too chronically
rationalism?
online.
Okay. I because rationalism could be referring to an academic school of thought or just like people, you know.
I think I'm more coming
Explain.
from there's this sort of online cohort that likes to call themselves rationalists, this community of people that tend to refer to themselves as rationalists, and their like sort of central gathering hub on the internet is a website called Less Wrong. So that's
Oh,
sort of the thesis of this question.
okay. So this is related to that, tangential. we often say it depends on what counts as evidence. Okay. So people often say, well, you must, you must listen to the evidence. But people in camps like this cultural rationalism today, or atheism, or people who consider themselves allies or warriors for science in the conflict against religion, presuppose what evidence is and have a very narrow definition of evidence, and it only extends to scientific evidence and what you can see and touch. This is highly limited. None of us, not a single human, reasons purely off the basis of scientific evidence about what you can see and touch. It's impossible. We all use something called theory of mind. We believe other minds exist. We interact with other human beings as if other minds exist. There is no scientific, it's scientific data is so limited. I have degrees in the sciences, high honors. I care about science. I love it a lot. But it's so limited. And all of our decisions about what is good or not good, I think those are evidence-based. I don't. And then of course, there's possibilities that our religious and spiritual experiences, our near-death experiences, our sacred texts, all this kind of stuff is actually evidentiary of stuff that exists beyond what we can see and touch. It's possible, right? And so rationalism is this set of norms, precepts, ideas, arguments that derive from this cultural identity of I want to seem like I'm courageous enough to be loyal to the cold hard facts. I really do think that that's it. I think our values and our identities drive most of our belief formation in what we consider to be rational. When I first went to seminary, I shared this commitment that the only beliefs that were rational were based off scientific evidence. And I went to seminary, and all of these people, I got into seminary, and I decided to go to BU, Boston University School of Theology. And they had a house for especially committed aspiring future ministers. It's called Theology House. And I was like, yo, can I live there? And they're like, you're an atheist, right? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, okay. Oh my gosh. And the things I got up to while I lived in that house.
Probably not the future ministers are us. Yeah.
Oh man. And so, and gosh, I encountered a lot there that I considered and continue to consider both deeply irrational and harmful. There's a lot of irrationality in religion, but that doesn't mean that this culture that calls itself rationalistic is rational either. More rational. To me, rationality is not adherence with an objective standard. It is coherence with present beliefs. Everything that each of us considers rational is anything we encounter in our lives or in the world that makes sense based off what we presently believe. Rationality, I suggest, is a feeling. I would love to. I don't know how productive conversations about this would be with people in the less wrong community, but I'm very open to it. And if I'm wrong about that, offer me your arguments and I'll sit with them carefully and let you know what I think. What are your thoughts on rationality and feelings? And are you familiar with William James's The Sentiment of Rationality? I thought you might.
Only insofar as I came across it while doing some research for this podcast. But Yeah, I don't know. I don't consider myself a rationalist, whatever that means necessarily. I think I just come at everything from a standpoint of humility, and it's like it's taken me a while to get there, because going back to the whole like everything comes from childhood stuff, I think there was some stuff in there that really sort of protected me on like pretending I was the in charge, or write about things, or had some knowledge that other people didn't. So it's taken me a while to get there, and it's still an ongoing journey as far as like pretending that I'm not a little bit afraid of being the stupidest person on every single podcast that I host. But I think, yeah, it's just leading with um, leaning into that sort of humility, and just there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And that I have a side note to that is I also spend a lot of my free time just learning anything. My wife laughs at me because I watched a 7-minute YouTube video when we first started dating about how the Japanese grow strawberries, and it's a continued thing in our relationship of you just learn random stuff. So anytime I bring up a random fact or something, she's like, "Of course you know that." Anyways, all of that is to say that I think I just enjoy the act of learning, and understanding that the more things I learn, the more things I don't know. And that is sort of where I've arrived to at that point. How do you, what sort of role does storytelling play, do you think, in some of this stuff?
Well, it depends on how one defines storytelling. Do you have a definition in mind?
The act of arranging information into um, a the act of arranging a set of information into a coherent narrative, I guess.
Well, that is also how I loosely would define it. And I would suggest that a full 100% of our beliefs are like that. I view humans as meaning maintaining organisms. And technically, the meaning of anything is its definition. Definitions always involve significance. You can't describe something without explaining its impact on other things and position it has in the world. So we're always interpreting. And we're doing this even before we come out of the womb, right? Because the amount of stress hormones that your mom has, like this already sets the stage for how you're interpreting the world. And every day of life, you interpret what happens through the lens of what you learned before. So there is whatever you learned in the womb. And then when you come out, you might be more fussy than you would have been otherwise, which changes your behavior, which changes how the adults react to you, which changes what you learn. And then the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And then you send kids off to kindergarten and elementary school, and you think, oh, well, now they're getting all the important objective lessons. But their ability to learn things like all humans are worthy of love is dependent on whether they were given that cue in their earlier years. And so we never stop telling stories, and we're constantly revising them. There's no moment that we're not revising the stories that we tell. It's just, sometimes we're reinforcing them, in certain directions, but we're always revising our stories, and we're always making the best sense we can. That just every sensible conclusion that we draw seems the most sensible at that moment in time, because it's the best we can do based on what we've witnessed and experienced. I mean, people the reason we all have different beliefs is because we've witnessed and experienced different things. And I think that's amazing. That's how we learn what reality was like. If we didn't have different experiences, there would be nothing, literally nothing. And we wouldn't have any differences and we wouldn't be able to learn. You were talking about the strawberries thing, right? Is strawberry something and how they grow strawberries in Japan? I've never been to Japan, but I believe it exists. And that's something that William James talks about, like that he uses that precise analogy. I believe it exists. I've never been there. And so I only get that because other people have been there. And I've read textbooks about it, sure, and I've seen documentaries, but that's all based on the fact that other people have been there and lived there and all this stuff. So all of the storytelling doesn't invalidate our beliefs. It is how we construct them with as much reason and discernment as possible. There's no such thing as stepping outside of that process, which is okay. I celebrate that.
Your PhD thesis is in part on Sam Harris, and he has this sort of exceedingly famous essay on lying. How does lying or telling the truth, particularly when it involves ourselves, complicate all of this?
Interesting question. I have never read Harris's book on lying. I didn't know that people were particularly rocked by it. Do you want to explain it before I answer the question, or I can go ahead and guess?
There's not much to say other than the conclusion of the thesis is that you should not lie and you should do everything in your power to not lie.
See, and let me just say here for all of the Sam Harris fans in the world. Okay, I don't hate Sam Harris the way a lot of scholars I know do. I think I love that he seeks a morality and advocates for secular morality, and I think he overstates the capacities of science and creates too many specious bridges between science and morality. And I also think that Sam Harris calls himself a philosopher and also derogates the study of philosophy, which blows my mind. That's not fair. You can't have both. You can't. Okay, so those are some things about Sam Harris. What I want to say about this book about lying is that it feeds this cultural idea that Sam Harris is the perfect epitome of, that you need to be courageous enough to face the cold, hard facts of science being the only reasonable way to know things. And we need to do our best to be honest with ourselves and one another. I'm all about that. Truth is my highest value. Absolutely. I think it's most people's highest value. The wildest thing in the world is that everybody thinks that other people are so irresponsible with the truth. I don't know a single person who wouldn't put truth up there as their highest value. We all want to know what's real. We care about it deeply. And so I think, and it's hard because we stand in our own way. And we've got all these psychological barriers to our relationship with the truth. But we can never say we know it fully. All we can say is I glimpsed it and I'm on the way. We all tell these stories about ourselves, about who we are, about who our parents are, about who other people are, all this kind of stuff. We never see anything with perfect crystal clarity. All we can do is try to see better and better over time. And so to me, don't lie on purpose, unless maybe sometimes you got a good explanation for it. But I don't like this idea that only rationalists are honest. What the hell? Everybody's trying to be honest, I think.
I think where I was sort of coming from with that question is that there is it's exceedingly hard in a world where we're bombarded with a million things every day to realize that we've come to a set of, and maybe this is the like entire point of intellectual vulnerability and the whole thesis of all of this, is that it becomes exceedingly hard to work out what opinions or beliefs we hold inherently as truthful to ourselves, and what beliefs we've sort of, I'll use the term unknowingly adopted, um, and maybe don't necessarily fit our hope for what we would want for our lives. Is there a way that we think about like sort of stopping that process of lying to ourselves or untangling the set of beliefs that might be ours versus might not be ours that we've inherited from elsewhere?
It's very interesting. A lot of people talk about inner wisdom. Like somehow you go deep in yourself, you have this inner wisdom. You're going to know for sure. You're going to be fully authentic to yourself. Maybe there's something deep down there, that's like, I've arrived at this. I haven't been forced into this. I don't see it as so dichotomous. Like, oh, it would be more authentic to me if I didn't just believe what my mom said or something. Maybe, there were instances in which we suppress things that we consider important for reasons. But I don't see it as that simple. I will say that it seems to me the greatest barrier between us and the capacity to see ourselves and explore ourselves and be curious about ourselves is shame. I think the biggest lever in our psychological makeup is how we talk to ourselves. And I think intellectual vulnerability, there's actually a chapter on this in my book, two big ones, helps unlock this, because intellectual vulnerability is all about being curious. It's trading certainty for curiosity. And I invite curiosity about all beliefs, including the beliefs you have about yourself. And how are you talking to yourself? And do you have negative thoughts and feelings about yourself? And if you do, why? And I suggest in my book, and this is based off of the work of a brilliant psychotherapist named cherished, that we learn negative stories about ourselves and negative beliefs about ourselves, and to talk negatively to ourselves when we're very young as a part of the drive to survive. I earlier talked about how much more important it is to belong than it is to have food, because you need to belong in order to get food. Belonging is the greatest of all human needs, and it's a survival need as an infant. If you don't figure out how to belong, you will die. And if we come into the world and feel unacceptable as we are for any reason, we begin to shame ourselves, to pretzel ourselves to fit. And so we learn to shame ourselves and to be mean to ourselves very early in life, to police ourselves and to assure our belonging, I think. And this is foundational to so many of our avoidant behaviors, distracting behaviors, obscuring ourselves. A lot of people, we learn to obscure ourselves from others, and in doing so, learn to obscure ourselves from ourselves. Not being in touch with our authentic needs and desires, all this kind of stuff. And it comes from this early drive to be safe, I think. I invite curiosity about that. And then also about like, okay, can I improve this belief? What do I think is more true about who I am? When I revisit my past and what happened to me and my present behaviors and what's going on, like, is there something wrong with me, or am I doing everything that I was designed to do? Learning to survive like that was important. Has it led to tragic consequences? Yeah. But that was the trade-off. Okay, now what am I going to do about it? To me, I see intellectual vulnerability as a forward looking emotional and intellectual habit. When we are certain, we're looking back at beliefs that we formed about ourselves, about one another, about the world, and we're saying this is correct because of what I've believed so far. But with intellectual vulnerability, I invite your curiosity about what might I learn? How can I revise this into the future? What our beliefs are always changing. And what if we get intentional about being a part of that process and directing it and trying intentionally and proactively to broaden and deepen our understanding? I think this kind of gets at what you were saying. I know it's a little tangential, but I think it's really important when we're talking about honesty with ourselves to start with those early stories we learned.
Do you have a framework that helps you be more intentional about directing that belief change in your own life?
It's a great question. I don't, so I just wrote I have a big book coming out, and I have decided to take longer with it than I originally planned. So it's going to come out in like a year or a year and a half. And that's the huge manifesto. But I just wrote a shorter version tentatively called The Certainty Cure. And that may come out in a few weeks. Just get it out there. And it's a shorter guide with all these different practical exercises and takeaways and daily things you can do and things you can do in your conversations with others. And I love it. I love it. It's and all this stuff in it is just sort of, most of it is baked into how I like to do things. I would say probably the biggest pieces for me are, and these are habits that you kind of start planting seeds of, and then you get feedback for how great it is, and then you keep doing it because you've learned, right? Habit change is for me all about giving myself data, right? I'm giving myself data. And so something that I love is looking at people with the lens of what can I celebrate? And in my daily practices, that means, I don't know, 10 times a day, I compliment somebody on the color they're wearing. Or something about their outfit or their bag or something. And I do it so instinctively with everybody. I don't care if they've got a slogan on their shirt that I don't like. Everybody. And I invite that as a something that just to do. What can I celebrate? Because even if if this person has beliefs that you disagree with, it's still, for them, it's a part of their safety and how they view the world as sacred and their attempts to know the truth. And when I see somebody with different views from me, I know that it's not just a different view. I know that it conflicts with my vision for the safety of our world. Okay, they have a different idea than I do for what the world needs to be safe. Okay, maybe I can learn something from that. And so one thing I do is I look to celebrate, and another thing I do is I look to learn. I enter every single interaction with people thinking, not what can I prove, but what can I learn? And when I find out people have different beliefs from me, I'm like, cool, tell me more. Why do I need to leap down their throat and be like, no, listen to me? Right? The instinct that we all have to do that is, I need to make myself and my vision for the world safe. I need to control outcomes. I need this person to get on my side. It's all about war. I need to get this person on my side. And I'm like, well, what if I need to be more on that person's side? What do they think? What do they know that I'm missing? What have they experienced? And it's so baked in. So I just invite meditating on those things. And another final piece is I feel very comfortable. I enjoy finding out I'm wrong about stuff and looking silly. It's tough, but for example, if I like fall down at the supermarket or something, or I drop my avocados, or you know what I mean? The instinct is to be like, oh no, how are people going to judge me? But what I think is letting myself be this way and comfortable this way gives other people the freedom to do the same. And I can't even begin to tell you how many circumstances I've been in my life where I've been in a circle of people and maybe they're all wearing tweed jackets because I've just been at a lecture or like whatever. And everybody's nodding sagely and lots of big words are being batted around. And I'm like, hang on. Can you tell me what carnophilagocentrism means? Like, hang on. I might be wearing a t-shirt that says Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit on it, but I actually haven't read the book. I've only read the Wikipedia entry on this, and I'm so proud of that. And that maps into all of this stuff that I've done in my life. Like, I've hosted my own podcast and they were pretty terrible, but you don't become great at things. You don't learn things without ignorance first. Like, it's just, you don't. And so I like that. I celebrate that. And I try to think about it as something to be proud of. And if people judge me for that, that's from their own insecurity. And there are people out there who celebrate it. And so if they're not in your circle right now, go find them, put them in your circle, follow them on Instagram, create a culture around you that celebrates humility and not knowing and vulnerability and reaching across divides. I've lost a lot of acquaintances or friends. I went on a date with a guy several months ago who was super cool. We like really vibed. I told him about my book. He was like, that's cool. And then he read it and he was like, it didn't vibe with him because he was too committed with his political positions. And I've had some friends like that too. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I would love to stay in dialogue with you because I like talking across divides. But I don't know, we are what we absorb. And so we can always surround ourselves with people and information and stuff that walks the walk we want to be walking. Thoughts?
Outside of the whole spiritual journey, what's been the most impactful use of the phrase "I don't know" in your life?
In my book, all right, so I've got 4 domains of health, and I talk about physical health. That's saying I don't know with respect to physical body stuff. Existential health, which is the spiritual stuff. Personal health, which is what you and I just discussed about beliefs about yourself. And social health, which is the domain of interpersonal relationships. And I invite a special curiosity about the role of belief in interpersonal relationships. I believe that having different beliefs makes us experience our social lives with our closer people, our intermediate people, our wider social circles as war, as an unsafe space. Because if people don't agree with me, then I'm unsafe, right? And they're out to get me. And I need to constantly be on the defense. Like, I suspect that a very large number of people are out there walking around the world just feeling unsafe all the time because, oh my goodness, there are people who disagree with me in this space. And to me, we don't recognize it, but that is deeply psychologically wounding, to be out in the world and to feel like you're not at home because people disagree with you. And they want, which, like, disagreement is essentially having a different vision for the world, right? So your vision for the world feels unsafe. For me, being able to say, I don't know, saved my family. I was raised in a Republican household. I went off to a liberal arts, liberal school, although the most conservative of all the Ivy League schools, which we joked about, was like, made it acceptable. Like, if I had decided to go to Brown, there had recently been a thing where there was like a party with naked people at Brown in the news. And my dad was just like, Anyway, so I went to Dartmouth and everybody was fine. And I came home after one semester and I had been taking environmental studies and stuff like that. And I had a course in the winter on, I was just so liberal, right? And I came home and I was obsessed with climate change and vegetarianism and all this kind of stuff. And it's not to, like my father hated littering. Like he wasn't against the environment, but I was becoming a different person with a different allegiance. And I started fighting and I switched from this mode of being dad's girl to trying to change him and thinking he was racist and ignorant and going home for the holidays and picking fights. Like that's what so many people I've known in my life and encountered online and in media like do. They leave home, they learn stuff, then they go back and they want to teach stuff. I need to teach you stuff. Okay, yeah, like maybe you've learned things that are really useful. But when you go home, you're you're not better than anybody there. And you don't care more than anybody there. And I know it might seem like it because their values seem like they're not in alignment with what you consider most valuable or what you consider to be the most humane way to be. I think a lot of people are concerned. They're like, their views aren't humane. I just invite you to really soften around that because to them they are. And to share what you think, but to still live in the world or to begin living in the world as if you still have more to learn. And part of what you have more to learn is with this person in front of you. Because nobody in the world offers more constructive perspective to you and can help you refine your ideas better than people who really disagree with you. It was many more years after college before I realized that Fox News shed light on things that I was overlooking. Sorry, it's my dog. Fox News shed light on things I was overlooking. And my dad has wonderful pushback and criticism and sheds light on things that I'm overlooking. So socially, I think it's huge. I think it's huge for our personal lives. You know, my romantic partner and I like have different political views. And some of my friends are like, oh my goodness, how can you do that? I'm like, it's the best. I love it. And so in families, nuclear families, in society, in comment sections, like what if other people are trying their best? What does that unlock for us? And how does that help life be more fun? You know, you can love everybody. I go out to the bar and I love everybody. It's okay. Just some thoughts.
I think I need to take the last 7 minutes of this podcast and buy a billboard in Times Square and just put it on repeat for a while. I'm going to need the podcast to get a little bit more successful in order to do that. But I think that's my new life goal, is to get that section of the podcast on a Times Square billboard with some captions, of course.
Yeah, thank you. And with my dogs barking in the background. I mean, and that's the hard thing. So like I face a lot of, you know, people, it's not necessarily something people want to hear, but if you can get them past the fear of, oh, I may be wrong, and into the love of, you know, the relief of being able to say, oh, it's cool for all of us to not know, and the love of one another in that space. Gosh, like at first I thought about calling this intellectual courage, but to me, like once you decide to accept that you're just one of 8 billion people doing their best, everything softens. It's just the chillest. I don't have to be anybody. Nobody else has to be anybody. We all just get to be on the way. And I'm so peaceful. I have so much peace, and I'm not a bad person. I try really, really hard to be a good person, and I offer techniques in my book for like ways to think and to do and to practice that. We have this crazy hyper focus on having the right beliefs to be a good person in our society, but is what's the best use of my time? Is it sitting in front of a computer and reading articles about Gaza for a few hours? Or is it volunteering at the VA and a local organization for underprivileged high school kids? These are things I do, and I know the names of the people who ask for money on the corners that I drive past and walk past. Right. And so, like, we all make choices about what we do and how we try to be a good person. And I don't know if I'm ever going to have the appropriate views on Gaza. And I choose to give my time and my heart to things that I am relatively confident I can make a positive impact on. Um, so that's just some other thinking about, what it means to be good, and how we can fulfill our drive to be good without necessarily fighting with other people about what to believe.
I think the sort of idea of impacting those closest to you. So this is a funny full circle moment here. The newsletter that I wrote 2 weeks ago, the one right after I sent you something from the newsletter, was about the tattoo. And I'll just read you sort of the end of the excerpt of this newsletter. And it says, but worldviews shift. Over the years, the phrase stopped being about winning arguments and started being about awe, about how improbable it is that anything exists, let alone us. Eventually, it turned into more of a question. What if? What if there's more to all this? What if the improbability of our existence is an invitation to live the way we want to? What if the only immortality we get is the way we show up for the people in our lives? If you zoom out far enough, you can't even see the Earth. Sorry, Steve, but whatever dent you want to make in the universe isn't visible. But you should try to leave a dent on the handful of people who will remember you while you're still here. Foster the moments that make life meaningfully better for someone else. The conversation that eases a friend's bad day, the time you drop everything to help your parents, and the habit of showing up for your partner. This week, try to close the gap with someone. Call, write, show up. And if there's a relationship you've let drift into space, do the quiet, awkward work of pulling it back into orbit. We are all stardust, but it turns out if enough of that dust sticks together, it shines pretty brightly.
Hey, I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. It's really cool. It's really cool. You know, I think a lot. There's a line in an Ed Sheeran song, forgive me, that I think about a lot. He says, love is the only thing we take with us when we die. And at the end of the day, like, what are we doing here? And what does it mean to love? And are we really trying to love our neighbors? Are we? I think a lot of people actually think they shouldn't anymore. And to me, loving one another is that pause before we lose our shit at them for any reason, including having beliefs that make us feel unsafe and getting curious about their experiences and closing that gap. Yeah. And then everybody becomes homecoming for us.
I have one final question that I like to ask all my guests, and that's, what's the last opinion or belief that you changed your mind about?
You ask all your guests. That's so cool. Man, it's interesting that you ask, because when you asked me about daily habits and practices, I consider a full 100% of my beliefs hypotheses. There are none that aren't in play, being tested and revised, some more actively than others. I mean, recently I went through a health thing and I just hypothesized and discarded 10 things, right, about that kind of stuff. I think bigger picture, the thing that if I'm looking at more specific kinds of things people form beliefs about and fight about in our culture, was Donald Trump's stuff about the tariffs. I remember not knowing a whole bunch about it. I don't pay a lot of attention to the news. I just don't. I just don't. But just thinking, assuming, I don't give Donald Trump benefit of the doubt, but I'm working on it. I actually am. And just trying not to always leap to certain things, right? So I'm having these ideas, whatever. It's just clearly for personal business gain, yada, yada, yada. And my boyfriend all along just did this really beautiful, like, oh, I'm trying to see like why, what kind of reason might be behind it, what kind of this might be behind that, all this kind of stuff. And then wouldn't you know it, but he ended up being kind of right about all of it. And I so appreciate that he was able to, that he was proactively looking for what might I be missing here. And yeah, I think I want to be a little bit better at not pre-ascribing motivations to people. I think we often come into things thinking, well, this person is motivated for their own gain, for this gain, for political gain, for financial gain. I don't know. Are they? Maybe they are, but let's not make that our starting point. Let's make that a conclusion we draw after looking at other things, right? So yeah, so there was that funny moment of the tariff thing, and then huger picture was, oh gosh, I changed my mind about so much. Political parties. I've done a lot of intentional thinking about political allegiance and where I put myself on those maps. And I've moved it a lot in recent years, and I moved it again recently for reasons for reasons that maybe we don't need to get into. I would be happy to, but and that's cool. I like that. Like, you know. So anyway, yeah, there was that, and then I've just been really deeply thinking about my political values and a lot of stuff. The role of faith in society. I tried to be Christian for a while, and then I didn't. Like, there's a lot changing here, but that's the name of the game, and I like it that way.
Stephanie, this has been absolutely fantastic. I will definitely have to have you back on at some point. But if we want to send people to all your amazing stuff, where should we send them?
Yeah, so you can Google me, look on the socials for Stefani Ruper. It's spelled like Stefani, so that's great because I got all the ats and the hashtags and the domain. Where I'm actively publishing content is mostly on Substack, and that's just stephanieruper.substack.com. And hopefully my Certainty Cure book will be out by mid-fall. So you can look for that too. But yeah, just Google me. Shouldn't be too hard to find.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Blake.